Finally! It's been so long since we've had a big, thick, juicy trade rumor on our hands to dissect. So, today we're talking about the Montreal Canadiens, a player in this organization who has been the subject of a lot of fan love over the past few years. Although he wasn't good enough to start with the team this season, we have a guy who's been on the block for a little bit, and another guy in the Washington Capitals system that is also in similar positions. So, we're heading over onto the fourth period because in David Pagnotta's recent piece, Can the Stars Make the Cap Work for Patrick Kane? You had yourselves a few extra tidbits linking the Habs and the Caps. Now, spoiler alert, there are a few other things that are linked in this same article, or not linked, but written about, and there's a bunch of material for other interesting conversations. We'll explore this piece and more as the next few days come and go. But let's go over into this piece. Link is in the description, by the way, if you want to read it yourself. And go into the here and there section of the article. Let's cycle back to the Montreal Canadiens. I'm told the Habs did indeed have a conversation with the Washington Capitals about local boy Anthony Mantha, and Montreal forward Yoel Armia was a part of the discussion. But I'm not sure if Montreal would have been his final landing spot. Those talks have quieted down, but could get revisited if the Capitals re-engage. So, this is an idea that was apparently talked about over the past little while, involving Armia and involving Anthony Mantha. Let's go over the profiles of these two guys before talking about the trade idea itself. Yoel Armia is 30 years old, big dude, 6'4", 218, right-handed guy, right-wing player, signed till the end of 2025, making $3.4 million a year. Now, Armia has been a pretty solid hockey player the past few years, but he was never really a top dog. Like, sure, he got 30 points in 58 games played with the Canadiens in 2019-20, but his role with the team was never really that of a primary offensive producer anytime afterwards. Even in that postseason when they went to the finals, Armia was more of that just kind of calming presence in the middle six, not really the fastest guy in the world, but somebody that actually had really tight puck handling skills. Like, it's a pretty constant observation that always happens whenever I watch Armia footage, is that the guy can stick handle in a phone booth when you give him the right opportunities, especially along the boards. He is so good at just kind of pulling the puck by one player and then kind of poking it away from the other guy. He's a really smart player along the boards, but really, he wasn't good enough to crack the Canadiens lineup for 23-24. As a result, he's been in Laval this season. He had 4 goals in 4 games played and 1 assist for 5 total points, but with the Canadiens' recent injury bug, he has indeed been called up and is a member of the Habs. Meanwhile, in the Washington system, you have yourselves Anthony Mantha, a guy who has been linked to Montreal in a few conversations in the past. He's also a big dude, 6'5", 234, left-handed winger. He is from Quebec, so there's always been a connection there with Mantha and the Habs. $5.7 million is his AAV, and he's on till the end of 23-24, so this season is the only year on the books for him. Mantha was a much better offensive point producer in the NHL than Armia in their primes. He had 48 points in 67 Red Wings games back in 2018-19. Give it a few seasons there were a bunch of trade rumors linking Mantha to a bunch of teams. He eventually got sent over to Washington, and now he is in a pretty precarious spot. Last year, he had 27 points in 67 games played, and ever since, let's say, the middle part-ish of that year, we had been hearing more and more that Mantha was on the trade block, that he might have wanted out himself, that there just wasn't really a connection there. And, I mean, look, the guy is still on the Caps at the time of recording this audio, so we know that those trade talks did not really go anywhere. But, as a player this season, Mantha has 2 points in 5 games played. He hasn't really been the same ever since he was that top-tier guy in Detroit. He always had a really good frame, really good skill set there, but just not the mentality to be able to put it together in a consistent top-6 power forward-like way. If Mantha was able to actually use his skills to the best of his ability consistently, there's no shying away from the idea that he could have been a 60, 65-point scorer, maybe even hitting 30 goals once in a while. You gotta remember, he hit 25 once in 67 games played. So this is a guy who definitely didn't have the right motivation heading into the next few years after that really great season in Detroit. and you just weren't really able to see the numbers put themselves together. He had a 23-point season in 37 games with the Capitals in 21-22, which actually rounds out to a pretty nice point pace of about 51-ish points, but Mantha was never really able to stay healthy in that span too, which contributed to the idea that he probably was on his way out, and with the Capitals being in the position they're in right now, I mean, the guy has been written about in trade rumors for so long now that it feels like a trade is inevitable. However, when it comes to the idea of him getting sent over to Montreal, this is not new. As we had said, he's from Quebec, so there's always been that sort of link there, and David Pagnotta's sources are telling him that earlier on there was this trade idea involving both Armia and Mantha. But the really interesting part that he talks about is that he wasn't sure if Washington would have been Armia's final landing spot. What that indicates to me is that this trade idea wasn't really one of a, let's just say, hey, Washington wants Armia, we want Mantha, we'll make the swap and it's a done deal. It was more of a, Armia is a guy who's probably going to get sent over to Washington, maybe get some salary retained by Washington, and then get sent over somewhere else for even more assets. Because Armia, as much as we love the guy for what he has done in the past, he wasn't good enough to make the Habs this year. So this is, maybe you could just say, an AHL talent making $3.4 million a season till the end of 24-25. Meanwhile, Anthony Mantha, sure, he's making more money, but he expires this upcoming summer. So there's a lot more value from a cap management point of view in a guy like Mantha if you are a team that is not trying to contend in the now like Montreal. Washington, on the other hand, they're in a strange spot too, because you've got Ovi and Backstrom, these guys are old, Kuznetsov has been on the block, so has Mantha. You obviously want to set Ovechkin up to being able to break Gretzky's goal record. I feel like that in itself more so is the top tier priority that the Caps have in their playbook, rather than going out there and winning another Stanley Cup, for example. But the change of scenery deal for Mantha might be an avenue to just get that guy off the team, especially if he's been the subject of heavy trade rumors over the past few months anyway. It is also interesting how Pagnotta says that the talks in this conversation, they died down a bit, but they could be reinstated if Washington themselves decides that they want to engage once again. This implies that it's mostly Washington's idea to have stepped away, therefore, if the Canadiens were offered it once more, they might be able to say yes. And of course, this is just one very brief skimming of it. It's not really going too in deep as to what other assets could be involved, because realistically, I mean, value for value, you could say that Armia and Mantha are both undesirable contracts in undesirable situations, therefore they might be a bit equal, balanced out by the extra year on Armia, the extra contract AAV on Mantha. But still, I mean, if you wanted to make some sort of a connection there, if you wanted to evaluate what's worth what, I feel like Anthony Mantha might be worth a little bit more, mostly because he's already an NHL guy who is still playing NHL minutes, and because he expires so soon. Like, I get it, if you're a team that's in the middle of a playoff hunt and you want to do well now, a guy like Armia might be seen as a little bit more valuable as extra fodder. But realistically, come on, who in their right mind is trading for Yoel Armia this year? Nobody who is contending for the Stanley Cup is interested in doing that, so you could understand the external forces that can be here at play influencing why these two guys are being talked about in a swap for each other. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the idea of a Yoel Armia and Anthony Mantha trade? Article is going to be linked in the description if you want to go ahead and read this yourself, but for now, let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Does this tickle your fancy? If you're a Caps fan, if you're a Canadiens fan, what would you do if you were in the GM's position? Would you want to make this trade? And if not, what would convince you to make it? What other assets do you think should be thrown in there to balance the scales or to make it more desirable for your team, etc., etc.? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.